In this lesson, we're going to get into how to make lesson 1 happen. So if you think of lesson 1 as the Desmos magic, lesson 2 is really just getting into how to make that magic happen. So we're going to go over how to start an activity, how to share that activity, how to find activities, and also how to use those tools to operate an activity. Since I haven't created an activity in this workshop yet, if I want to get started on a Desmos activity, I have to search for it. So I'm looking up the pool border problem in the search bar, and then I'm going to select the activity. So the page I'm looking at now gives me a full description of what a Desmos activity would look like, but I'm going to scroll down and click on Create Class Code. From there, I'll have a code to share with students so they can participate. And if I want to use the activity immediately, I have to click on Dashboard. I also want to note that I use a different code for each class, so it's easy for me to stay organized. Then I'll see the code again, which I have to exit out of to see the dashboard. And that's pretty much it. As soon as I open the activity, I'm going to wait for students to sign in. So over time, this routine gets a little bit easier, but I often let students know to just start signing in as soon as they can to save time. And since students are paused, no one can really move ahead of the pack just yet. So I've unpaused students, which allows students to start moving, so that's why I have students on screens 1 and 2. And now my students are here, so I can arrange the list of students into alphabetical order or the time they entered. I'm purposely pausing myself here a bit because I'm seeing that some students are still on the introduction screen, so I'm going to wait a little for them to catch up before I paste them to screens 2 and 3. And I can do that by clicking on pacing and then clicking on the screens that I want and then confirming. In order to get to the teacher view, I can click on the screen I want to focus on and I can see the students' responses live time, meaning as they write and draw and erase, I can see it. Also note that any teacher moves are readily available as I move through the lesson. So this would be a good time to really take a look at students' responses. And if you want to give a student feedback, all you have to do is click on their text box and then click on the chat symbol at the very top and a little window will pop up so you can make a comment. This message will only be sent to the student and they won't be able to write back. So it's not like a private chat with the student. It's really just that they get to take into account the comments that you made, and you can even see if they did that by checking their work. Also, if I see a couple students that need the same feedback, I'll just copy and paste what I have here onto other students' responses. And if it's more than a couple students, I would likely just share this feedback with the whole class because it's way too much of a hassle to go through each and every student's responses. Now I see many of my students have written pretty full responses for the screens I paste them at, so I can move them forward by editing my pacing. And now we're looking at a screen where students have a math text box available, which means that it changes the teacher format a bit. So not only can we see the responses in math text, but we can also just summarize what we have so we can easily spot which students are saying what. I love this feature because even if students' answers vary, I can get a sense of their responses way quicker than if I were to walk around. And also even scrolling down, it can be kind of tedious. So if I see a couple of responses I want to present with the class, I can click on those cameras to take snapshots. Then if I go to snapshots, those expressions are going to be there along with who wrote them. And I can even add a title, which I think is going to be essential because the whole purpose of this snapshots is to present this to students. And if they don't know what they're looking at or looking for, then they really won't be engaging with the snapshots as best as they can. Once I finish typing, I can click present, and if I want to look at one student's work at a time, I can click on a corner. I'm going to pace my students to a wider range of screens, and this is when, as a teacher, I would say, okay, I've opened up the screens, you may move forward to screen 9, and so as you can see, some of my students will be ready to move on, while other students are not going to be ready at all. So I think that's the beauty of keeping the pacing open, is that it leaves room for think time being different for each student. So if I notice a student's work needs to be hidden, which can be because maybe they made an inappropriate comment or maybe they logged in twice by accident and it might be confusing for me to keep track of their thinking, I can hide a student, which means that my students will not be able to see their work, I won't be able to see their work, but the student can still participate. So all I have to do is go to Summary, find the student's name, click Hide, and I can always unhide them if I need to see their responses again. I've paced my students at screen 9, so we're at the multiple choice screen, and this functions kind of like the summary that we saw before with the math text input, because we can see which students answered what, and we can even see their explanations if we scroll down and if they were given the opportunity to do so, which was the case in this screen. So another thing we can do is click on the answer key. This is something that I normally do and use to check because I can do so privately without notifying students about what the right answer is. And if I really want to show them the correct response, I would pause them because as you can see, some of my students are already changing their answers. Okay, so you may be thinking, that's a lot to keep track of in the middle of a lesson. So if you want to go back after your lesson, it will not be in custom because I didn't make this activity. So I need to go to history and find the activity. And this is a mistake I make often, so that's why I'm mentioning it to you. Your students will be gone, hopefully, and there's a lot you can still look at. So on screen 2, if I want to see their drawings on screen 2, I can use the overlay to pick up patterns. I can also see those students that read my feedback because their little triangle in the corner will be gray, and if it's green, that means they haven't read it. Finally, if I considered screen 10 to be the exit ticket, I can click on any student's work and start scrolling down to examine their work alone, and it makes grading a lot easier for me. We're all done looking at the teacher view, so you can go on to the next video. Students are going to start at the student.desmos.com screen and enter the code. So also note that I'm not using uppercase the entire time. That's totally okay. All you have to do is click join. So students have an option to sign in with Desmos through Gmail or not at all. All options are totally fine, but if students accidentally log out or want to return to their work at another time, they need to sign in. So if you allow students to continue without signing in, I recommend making it an expectation that they write their names because this is a time when students tend to get real creative with their usernames. Now we can see the Desmos activity, but it's paused just as I had intended as the teacher. The teacher has unpaused me and now paced me to screen 2, which is where the first prompt is. I'm going to be adding a very typical style of response from my students, which is that they usually have really strong reasoning but maybe don't support it with details. And once I click share with class, I should be able to see other students' responses. Unfortunately, no one has answered yet, so I'm all alone with my thoughts here. If you recall in the last video, I gave this comment feedback, so as the student, I'm seeing a notification from the teacher, that little red dot on the very top, and when I click on it, I can see what the teacher said, and then immediately go to the screen my teacher was referring to by clicking on Go to Screen. So now that I'm back to screen 2, I can read other students' responses and use my teacher's feedback to edit my response as a student. And even though students will be moved to this screen, it's not a restriction, so students can easily move forward or back. However, in this case, I was paced to screen 4, and the feedback will stay up until the student closes it, but it will remain saved even if they do close it. I really wanted to point out a very classic Desmos part of this activity. So if you notice, the student is focused in on adding a border to the pool, and instead of simply just saying correct, Desmos provides a graphic to show students what their numerical expression or value means for the situation at hand. So the feedback actually puts the responsibility back on the students to evaluate whether their response makes sense or not and to consider how to make adjustments. So now as a student, we're seeing the math text box, and this keyboard won't always pop up unless the student has a tablet like I do. But at first look, it can be very intimidating because it's a full scientific calculator, and for younger students, that might be a lot. So if you need students to write with variables, be sure to prepare them to click on ABC, then return back to main to use operations and so on. Also, since students are really checking their work on the next screen, the button on screen 9 says Submit, not Share with class. Lastly, we're going to focus on what multiple choice looks like. So notice that students will not get feedback on what's the correct response, but if the student shares their reasoning with the class, they have a chance to see other students' responses like we've seen in the text box.